ela chegou com a proposta de gerar empregos e renda e riquezas na nossa região, né? Só que ao longo dos anos nós percebemos que não era só isso.
Filho do Júnior nasceu, morreu. Filho de Dorinho nasceu, morreu. O filho da Priscila, tudo grau parentesco.
Desculpa. É um sentimento de impotência diante de tanta coisa que acontece e que a gente luta para tentar melhorar a vida das pessoas e não consegue.
Nobody had looked into the aluminum supply chain and made that direct connection from turning green and going more environmentally aware to, in fact, actual destruction in the Amazon at its source.
Part of that supply chain starts deep in the Amazon, and then it ends up in Dearborn, where the Ford F-150 is made.
Consumers in the United States, they're not necessarily understanding that those green choices come with an impact.
Mining, sort of by definition, is always a dirty business. When you're talking about mines in the Amazon region, you have to first tear down large swaths of natural rainforest just to get to the mines. They scrape out long strips of soil. They get to the bauxite, then they claw that bauxite out. Then they ship that ore to a refinery along the Amazon River. And that ore is separated, and it produced massive amounts of waste on both of those steps.
The Alunorte refinery is located within the Amazon rainforest. It is on a tributary of the Amazon River itself, and it is an absolutely enormous complex. It's completely surrounded by green and communities that have lived around there for decades. It came in, it built this entire huge industrial complex. The entire thing is a gigantic area of smokestacks and slurry containers and waste ponds. In order to separate the red mud that turns into the white powder alumina that's used to make aluminum, you have to add caustic soda, heat it to very high temperatures, and then add lime. The waste from that process goes into these waste area, essentially ponds, but they're giant, they're like lakes.
The landscape around that area has just changed from night and day. It used to be the case where it was very fertile land. They were able to grow acai there. They had mango trees, and they were able to survive on this land. Now they say that nothing grows. These are very poor communities. They're largely indigenous communities or Black communities. They're extremely vulnerable. There are allegations that over the past more than 10 years, the refinery has been slowly poisoning the communities. It's not all by Norsk Hydro's Alunorte. There's a number of plants, but Norsk Hydro Alunorte is the largest plant that's there. There are allegations that in 2018, these big waste depositories that they maintain overflowed during heavy rains and flooded the communities with this toxic sludge of water.
Nas comunidades vizinhas à mineradora vivem mais de 400 famílias. A confirmação de que os igarapés que abastecem a região foram contaminados por metais tóxicos assustou os moradores.
Alanorte completely denies that anything happened at that time, but the people say that it did.
A consequência de saúde ela é muito grande. Por exemplo, eu há pouco tempo sofri uma pneumonia, que eu fiquei quase 30 dias internado, né? E ainda hoje eu não sei direito o que é que está causando dentro de mim. Eu só sei que eu estou com muitas dores de cabeça, muitas dores no corpo, o peito dói muito, né? E eu acredito que eu possa estar contaminado também por essa poluição daí. Só que ainda não fiz um exame para saber. Mas aqui na nossa região, nós temos mais de 300 laudos que já foram feitos que deu positivo a contaminação no sangue das pessoas. E 99,9% das nossas águas da região, tanto de rios como do lençol freático, elas estão impróprias para o consumo humano, com uma quantidade muito elevada de metais pesados.
Porque essas indústrias, elas processam minérios, né? Então, esses minérios, eles têm na sua constituição praticamente toda a tabela periódica. A sopa de letrinhas é a quantidade de elementos químicos que existem ali naqueles efluentes, né? E que são jogados 24 horas, não é só em época de vazamento, né? Porque não há a retirada desses elementos químicos, né? Desses efluentes atmosférico. Então você vê ali todo um ecossistema sendo contaminado e inclusive as pessoas, né? Biota, frutas, alimentos, tudo sendo contaminado por esses elementos da sopa de letrinhas, né? Da tabela periódica.
So sometime last year, I heard about this lawsuit that the residents were bringing against a alumina refinery. When I traveled to Barcarena, I asked to meet the claimants in this lawsuit. And there are 9 people who are part of the lawsuit, and then there is a 10th organization that is part of the lawsuit. That is an organization that represents Indigenous people in the area. There are 11,000 people who are part of that suit. The government sponsored a medical test for people in the communities to test the levels of heavy metals in their blood and in their hair. And people only have that one medical exam to actually verify the fact that they've been feeling sick for years. People were literally chasing me down the street with their health reports, wanting to show me how sick they are from the pollution. One lady had 175 times the allowable amount of aluminum in her hair, multiple times the amount of lead in her bloodstream. These people suffer considerable health problems. They can't drink the water. The water is completely polluted in the entire area in Barcarena. It's a terrible situation for a lot of the people in this community.
Eu culpo o governo do estado pela morte do meu marido, pela morte do meu neto, pela morte dos meus grau parentesco, pela morte dessas futuras gerações que estão nascendo e morrendo. É culpa dele, que já tem ciência porque ele fez os exames e tá com o resultado. Conhecedor do que nós estamos morrendo e nada faz. Esse dinheiro.
I sat down with Maria do Socorro, who is the lead of the Quilombola Association in the area. And her association is the lead plaintiff in this case. She lost a grandson a couple years back. He was born with skin that was so thin, she says, that his intestines actually burst out of his body when he was born.
Isso aqui, estourado, rasgado, fino que nem uma folha de abelha e o bucho pra fora. Ele morreu. Outros aqui, nasceu sem um pintinho, sem um bumbum. Outros nasceu tudo rasgado aqui, aqueles buracos.
Você tem medo de ficar aqui?
Eu tenho medo de morrer, eu não quero morrer. Mas ao mesmo tempo, eu tô na resistência.
Alunorte is the refinery in Barcarena, which is owned by a company named Norsk Hydro. The largest shareholders of Norsk Hydro is the Norwegian government, which has been one of the biggest critics of Brazil's track record when it comes to protecting the Amazon.
In Norway, there's an enormous push towards environmental use of hydroelectricity. It's all very green. There are very strict environmental standards that companies have to adhere to in Norway. And the irony here, and something that a lot of people in the Amazon are upset about, is the fact that the government of Norway has come to Brazil, criticized the government for, in fact, its destruction of the Amazon, and at the same time is the largest owner of a company that is accused of polluting in the Amazon.
Nós temos uma estrutura mesmo processual que faz com que uma empresa que tem poder econômico ela possa usar com bons advogados e tragam recursos. Eles me atacam até pessoalmente.
The lawyer in Brazil, Ismael Moraes, he has tried and tried in Brazilian courts to bring this case, to get redress for these people. They don't have access to basic health care, basic medical exams. And so what he's been fighting for in Brazilian courts is to get the company to at least pay some contribution or provide medical care or do something for the surrounding community for people who say our health is affected, our drinking water is affected, we need help.
Nós temos 5 processos, né, contra a Hydro. Lá na Holanda, o processo ele vai entrar nas provas agora este ano já. É emergencial, é a gente remediar isto aqui para que essas pessoas continuem vivendo sem serem tão afetadas.
A justiça, ela quer que a gente diga exatamente o que quer ouvir. Ou seja, eu provo por A mais B que isso aqui, que está aqui no Rio, veio daqui. Eu provo. Como eu lhe falei, estudos estatísticos mostram isso. Então eu digo, olha, tá vendo aqui o alumínio? Tá vendo aqui o sódio? Tá vendo aqui o cloreto? Ele vem daqui. Eu provo isso estatisticamente. Tá vendo a associação do cloreto e do sódio? Né? Mostrando aqui que eles adicionaram HCl no Rio, eu provo. Mas para a justiça, isso não adianta.
Activists and researchers, they've been studying this and they've proven over and over and over that these communities are polluted. What they haven't been able to do is make that final leap from all this pollution to the refinery. So they haven't been able to make that final jump from cause and effect. What they need is they need the government to say, okay, Norsk Hydro, you need to open your doors, you need to let them get this material so that they can compare the composition from the toxic metals in the water to the toxic metals in these the waste deposits.
It's extremely difficult to chase an aluminum supply chain. There's very little transparency. I tracked ships with a vessel finder online. You could see where the ships were leaving which port and going to another port, carrying what kind of cargo. It took me a considerable amount of time, in fact, a few months, to be able to finally trace the entire supply chain from bauxite to alumina to aluminum, then into the United States to part suppliers, and then ultimately to Ford.
It's time for electric to turn into lightning. An electric truck that can match the ambitions of this nation.
Even before Ford announced that it was going to make an electric version of its best-selling pickup, it had already started switching from steel to aluminum, because aluminum is a lot lighter, and so it reduces gas consumption in these vehicles and makes it generally more efficient of a vehicle. The switch into electric vehicles accelerated that drive even more to use more and more aluminum. The typical vehicle in the United States uses about 500 pounds of aluminum, and an EV will use 150 pounds more than that. The shift from gasoline-fueled vehicles into electric vehicles is hugely important for the US government's goal of reducing carbon emissions. But in order to complete that shift, car makers need to reach middle America. And so the Ford F-150 targets that audience perfectly.
Remember where you were when you heard about it.
So when I approached Ford, they were initially unaware of the direct links between their supply chain and Brazil. So it took my researching the whole supply chain, finding those links via Canada into the US, that actually caused Ford to then say, we are now going to investigate our supply chain. I think that American consumers need to understand that there's a cost of going green. And until we can put enough awareness and enough attention and enough pressure on places that are also providing those natural resources that are allowing us to make green choices, the rest of the world is going to suffer the consequences.
Sustainable supply chains have become sort of all the rage recently. Companies are rushing to be able to say that their supply chains are sustainable. In a lot of cases, they haven't actually done the work to connect all these dots to the ground. So they say, everything is legal, it's a sustainable supply chain. And what you find in these developing nations is that what's legal can't be the bar of what's sustainable and what's green.
A nossa estrutura judicial e a nossa estrutura legal, ela é absolutamente desprivilegia, vou usar esse termo aqui, as pessoas pobres, né? A Norsk Hydro, ela contrata os melhores advogados ambientais do país para litigar nesses processos aqui no Brasil. E ela recorre de absolutamente tudo e faz de tudo para atrasar os processos, e consegue.
Aluminium. It makes our lives lighter and easier.
After 5 attempts to sue Norsk Hydro in Brazilian courts, the Brazilian lawyer teamed up with a global law firm and decided to bring the suit in the Netherlands. And there's a court there that ruled that it has jurisdiction over the case because Norsk Hydro also operates in the Netherlands, and the parent company is the same as the one that is operating the Alunorte refinery in the Amazon.
They took the case abroad because at home they'd had several cases that had been stuck in the judicial system for years. It is very easy to get cases and leave them into like sort of this judicial limbo in which they will just never be resolved.
Ela combate o processo, ela não combate o esclarecimento, ela não combate a acusação, então ela não quer o processo. Ela me ataca como advogado, ela ataca a associação, eles recorrem das decisões do juiz, mas não querem que isso seja feito, esclarecido.
Nós somos ameaçados, nós somos processados, né? A vida da gente se acaba tentando resolver, tentando fazer os trabalhos sem dinheiro algum, né? Porque não tem governo, não tem dinheiro do governo, não tem dinheiro de lugar nenhum para bancar essas pesquisas. Mas mesmo assim a gente faz. Porque querem nos matar de fome sem financiamento, né? Mas a gente mesmo assim é teimoso e vai lá e faz e mostra.
Perdão aí que...
Imagina, eu fico emocionada.
É um sentimento muito forte que a gente tem, porque a gente tem acompanhado aí a vida dessa gente e tem visto muitos amigos morrerem, né? Muitos mesmo. São poucos não. E morrer com, a gente sabe, a gente tem certeza, não tem um estudo que diga, não, porque quando morre não é feito um exame toxicológico para dizer exatamente o que a pessoa morreu, o médico dá lá um laudo que morreu e pronto. Mas a gente tem certeza que a intoxicação por metais pesados está matando muita gente aqui.
Eu conheci Oslo, conheci a Noruega, é linda. Mas você tem, assim, noção do que seria se um brasileiro fosse para a Noruega e começasse a acumular ali nos fiordes uma bacia de 40 milhões de toneladas de lixo tóxico e começasse a jogar aquele efluente cheio de elementos tóxicos ali nos fiordes?
So after we published the story, there have been a number of inquiries, closer looks at the aluminum supply chain in the US. It really does appear that a very large portion of the aluminum in the US supply chain is linked to this destruction in the Amazon and the pollution that is alleged to be from this refinery in Brazil. The solution here is the pressure from the end users, and that means companies like Ford going back through their supply chain and saying, hey, where do you get this alumina from? Where do you get this bauxite from? And pressing for more higher environmental standards, because the environmental standards in Brazil are pretty lax. And it's only when companies at the end of the chain and consumers who buy those products and put the pressure on the companies demand higher standards that those standards get fixed at the source.
Você perguntar hoje para essas comunidades se querem essas indústrias aqui ou se querem que elas vão embora com todo esse lixo com elas, porque não adianta elas irem embora e deixar esse lixo para trás. Eles vão dizer sim, a gente prefere que essas indústrias vão embora daqui e levem esse lixo daqui. Isso vai ficar para nós. E para as próximas gerações, e para as próximas, e para as próximas, e para as próximas, e para as próximas, e para sempre. E estão aqui na Amazônia. Mas não foram os brasileiros que colocaram.